This Choircast podcast is brought to you by The Collective. At The Collective, we believe that justice isn't optional, it's actually sacred. That's why we're building a growing library of progressive resources, connecting you with queer and Black-owned businesses, linking to books that challenge the status quo, and delivering content that empowers you to resist fascism with clarity and compassion. So join the movement. Support the mission. Visit The Collective, that's QUOLLECTIVE.com, The Collective, to learn more and get involved.
This Choircast podcast is brought to you by The Subversive Soul. Has anyone ever told you that your soul is essentially whole? How about singular, embodied, and wild? Did they teach you how to live from your soul in a way that rearranges your guts and sets you on a path toward wholeness? That's exactly what this book delivers. The Subversive Soul by Phyllis Mathis is available now on Amazon.
This is Radical Love Life, an ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders exploring faith outside the boxes, hosted by Mark Dilcomb and Kelly Wilson.
Well, hello, Kelly.
Hello, Mark. How are you?
I am freaking awesome.
Oh, it's so good to hear.
I
Even
am
on a
good.
rainy day like today.
Even like a
it's just
rainy day,
pouring
yeah.
out
Well,
there.
listen, you're here, and Marvin's here, and we got Bruce Epperly joining us for round 2 of our new way of doing our conversations of Radical Love Life. So we're picking up on that. So yeah,
Awesome.
I like. There's no reason why not to be freaking awesome. I'm just saying.
Oh, that's good. That's
Yeah.
good.
Behold, we do a new thing.
Right? Indeed. So, I guess we're going to pick up where we left off with the last episode, which was a perfect cliffhanger. Dun, da, da, da.
Yeah, if you can't trust part of the Bible, how can you trust any of it?
That's exactly right. So, again, Bruce had teed us up with a moment that, like, if you can't believe Genesis, then what happened? If there's any doubt. All right, let me try that again. If you doubt Genesis, then how can you trust the resurrection? So that's where we left it, and we're going to pick up from that point. All right, Bruce, go.
Well, I'm glad I remembered, I'm glad I remembered, one day is a million years to God, and maybe one day is a million memories.
Is that
to me.
true? Is that
Well,
true?
it does say there's scripture that says that a day is like 1,000 years to God.
Yeah, but Bruce said it's a million
which gets
years.
pulled into a lot of Bible prophecy interpretations where people are saying like, oh, that week, that's actually 7,000 year periods, which is how we map that against dispensationalism and figure out.
But we'll put that off to the side because that sounds like something else we could dive
that's
into.
exhausting. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we can really dive into that water.
God.
But,
All right.
I think in many ways a conservative approach or the fundamentalist approach, and I think Trump's majority of his Christian supporters, who are still dyed in the wool, are conservative fundamentalist Protestants or traditionalist Catholics would be among the religious communities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And they're very Cartesian in their approach. That is, Descartes, the philosopher, said, if you can doubt anything in a certain area, you can doubt everything about it. And the only thing
is that really the fundamental of Descartes? It boiled down to that if you can doubt anything or doubt one thing, then you can doubt all of it?
Yeah, of that particular sector of knowledge. So it left him to say, I can't doubt my existence, so I think, therefore I am.
Yeah, I think, therefore I am.
But in a way, that's how the conservative fundamentalists and traditionalists see things. If you doubt Genesis, well, is anything else trustworthy in the Bible? If you doubt the Battle of Jericho, if it is and the killing of all those people, is anything believable in the Bible? A similar logic, I believe, is at work in Trumpism. If you abandon Trump, you have to abandon your basic view of the nation and maybe the planet and the world. And Trump has become almost the genesis. Even with the tariffs and even some of the political issues, people say, I'm not sure about tariffs, but you got to trust Trump. Trump knows what he's doing. And there's a certain sense that the house is built on the sand. They think it's rock, but it's really sand. In the same way that I think the Genesis arguments against Genesis were built on the sand, even though they thought them rock. Because if you look at the studies, of some of the reasons people leave churches, it's because of the anti-scientific viewpoints of churches.
Yes.
And of course, this is carried all the way through from Copernicus to mask wearing to fluoride in your water.
Oh my gosh.
To anti-vaccination. It all has to do with science is at one level out to get you.
Wait a minute. Okay. We'll stop for a second. I just want, because you threw like that. That's worthy of just reflecting on what you just said. So you think even like this, because the state of Florida just this week passed a law that there are no fluoride in the water. You think this? You're suggesting that this has biblical basis to it?
I don't know if it's biblical basis, but conservative reactionary basis to it.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Again, think about the fact that, and again, this is my perspective. I see the world very differently than these people. The ones who thought the Earth was the center of the universe and the sun wasn't the center of the solar system. It was a matter of faith and unfaith. And later on it was Darwin, faith and unfaith. And later on, it was whether we should have vaccines or not. It's even in the, even though there's plenty of science about homosexuality, LGBTQ issues, well, you can't trust the science on that.
It's actually fluoride that makes boys gay.
Is that what made me gay? Was the fluoride?
That's what I read it on Facebook this morning. Yeah.
Wow. Who knew?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we don't know what boys will become or girls will become now that there isn't fluoride. That's a whole question. We're entering into.
I feel like this is going to be like the three-eyed fish on The Simpsons or something like that.
I grew up on a farm with unfluoridated well water, so that's, if I'm gay, it's not because of the fluoride.
That's true. That is a good point.
You know what? One thing that I remember kind of growing up in that environment, that evangelical environment, when the moral majority, Pat Robertson and those guys had really scoped out the Republican Party. They were like, we're going to sell the Republican Party as the Christian Party.
Yes.
And demonize the Democrats.
Yes.
And I think a lot of what we're seeing right now, this kind of like, we got to trust Trump, we got to go with Trump, is not only because of his perceived qualities, but because there's so much fear of the Democrats being in league with scientists, being in league with the deep state, being in league with all these demonic forces that are trying to remove God from the equation, remove morality from the equation, remove those really comfortable gender barriers from the equation. They're trying to ruin everything. So that it becomes such a desperate, like, world on fire situation that they would almost have voted for anyone who was opposed to this evil Democrat tyranny.
They have their own domino theory, that when things began to go wrong in the 1950s and the civil rights issues, and which were communist, again, that was the term used to describe Martin Luther King as a communist.
Oh my God, absolutely, right. Oof.
And, then comes the expansion of rights is a threat to traditional understandings of humankind. And you've got to give some bit of compassion to some of these folks. I'm not as compassionate to the ideological leaders. I think they may very well.
Exactly.
But the guy sitting in his Barca lounger in Pennsylvania or in Louisiana, or anywhere in between, change has happened quickly.
It has. Mm-hmm. I'm going to throw something out here just as a wild hair. We were involved in a conversation a few weeks ago with friend Tamise Spencer Helms, and she wrote a book called Faith Unleavened. Tamise It's a powerful book. It's I highly recommend it to you to read if you've not.
Oh yes.
To me, says she calls it for what it is, being Black herself, Black and queer, and she says one of the core issues for us is our own whiteness and our own lack of roots. And she's like, that's the one thing about African Americans, the Black community, we by and large know our roots. If for any reason, because of the pain and suffering we had to go through what got us here to the United States in the first place, because primarily it's because of slavery and all the legacy. And just because 1964 happened, they still live this legacy. And her book is written around, the Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and Michael Brown and, George Floyd and all that other ugly shit that happened. But she's saying to us, because we don't know our own roots, just to be an American, that's very shallow. Like you really don't have roots around that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, what you just said, is it because you have shallow roots and these things started to happen in the 1950s where there was an expansion of rights? People are like freaking out.
Oh yeah.
Is there a correlation? I mean, does that fit into Misa's this theory that she's putting out there that because we're lack of roots?
I have to give it some thought, but let me suggest that the Christian subculture really began to take off in the 60s. The notion that our identity is Christian, we're going to listen to Christian music. We'll go to Christian churches. We'll go to conservative churches. We'll vote the way Christians are supposed to vote. We'll support the things Christians. That was a quest for identity, I think.
That's her point.
That's like
seeking identity. Yes.
Right. And I think what he's saying is that there's a certain, and I'm going to say white conservative evangelical identity, which is, and I identify, I actually was just writing about this earlier this week. Like in my part of my spiritual autobiography is, I don't have any relationship with Scotland or England but I do have a relationship with white evangelical American Christianity, and it goes back generations. Like we've got ministers wandering around in woods in the 1700s.
Mm-hmm. True.
So and the great question is how to make your identity important without siloing it. That this is who we are, but there are many with different identities than we are. And to see our identity as not threatened by others. Well, it's an interesting thing that goes to a conversation that we had at our congregation. I'm on a search committee for a position in youth ministry and Christian education, faith formation. And the question for progressive Christians, because in our own way, progressive and liberal Christians, mainline Christians have, we are part of the culture in a lot of ways. How do we teach distinctively Christian values to our children that are not just reflective of American consumerist relational values? You know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And how do you do that?
But they're also not just like ethical society values.
No, it's much more than that.
That why, because if we could do that, why is Jesus important?
Yeah. And I think that's the call for, you'll hear this from, people, like N.T. Wright, for example, give him his book on Jesus and politics, or the politics, and his most recent book on politics. His position is similar to a lot of voices within mainstream and progressive Christianity, was that we need a strong, robust theology, not necessarily backward looking from my perspective, and practices that guide our social involvement rather than the other way around. The progressive church shouldn't be the instrument of the Democratic Party or the Socialist Party. No. But we support certain things that look socialist, look human rights, that Democrats are doing, because we find it in our theology. We find it
intersects with our faith, our theology, how we want the world to be. It intersects. not unlike what is happening on the other flip side of things like that, but there is a fundamental difference between what is very conservative, inwardly focused, literal Christianity, and the fact that if you immediately othered, if it's a them or us thing, you're suggesting that we're both and we look for the intersectionality.
When I if I go to the voting booth and I want to find somebody who promotes what I believe are Christian values, it almost always does not look Republican. It's just, I don't agree with everything in the Democratic Party, and I think they've really mismanaged things over the last few years.
They've done a horrible job. I mean, we could do multiple episodes on how the DNC has screwed shit up.
But if I look broadly at the two, I'm like, there's not even a question, which is funny because for other people they would say, well, for us it's not a question because of abortion, because of what they call religious freedom, which tends to be kind of religious dominance.
And I think that challenges progressives to really think more theologically, to have more teaching of religious practices and the relationship of religious practices to personal and social ethics. In the old school, and the evangelicals or conservatives have failed here too, because they've failed to disciple people in terms of their citizenship.
Oh my God, yes, absolutely. They would disagree with you. You know that, Bruce, right? Because, and I say this only just to put this there, what I see from, like when I go back home and see my mom or just, friends and family that live in red states, I don't know how to say it. Like so many kids go to Christian academies, like they're being pulled out of public schools left and right as we see that collapse. But their citizenship is going to happen in very controlled, experiences. Like, well, so you are learning how to be a great American and a great citizen. It's just that it's going to be very fundamental. It's going to be there's not going to be any expansive way to look at it. It's going to be their way only.
It also, I think it's contingent on their eschatology. So that if they're looking at the end of the world happening next week and Jesus is going to come back, that this American citizenship is a temporary thing. And it's really like our job is to hunker down and hold on to our values for this temporary amount of time until Jesus comes and blows this place up, and then we all go to heaven. And that's our ultimate purpose. So in some ways, the whole idea of like, why wouldn't we drill for oil everywhere?
Yeah.
I mean, this rotten old planet's just going to get thrown on the trash heap in a week anyway. Why wouldn't we go around and tell everybody who doesn't believe the way that we do that they're wrong, because that's how we save their lives. Their lives are in danger.
Well, all right. So without some data to quantify what you just said, but I'm thinking because you mentioned that you're consistent in mentioning that in our conversations. I'm thinking that scares the shit out of me each time you say that, because I'm thinking, do people actually have that kind of view?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's
see, both of you are just like
the support of, and it's too complicated for me to get into, but just say like the blanket support of, there's a war in Israel, so we got to support it, is based in Christian eschatology. Like, I don't understand who the players are exactly, but I just know that.
But it doesn't matter.
That's God's chosen people. We always got to support them. They have a role in the end times.
Battle of Armageddon.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So this is what I know to be the Zionist. Is that what you're talking about? That kind of flavor of.
I don't even think it goes that far. Like just people who have a sense of, there's war in Israel, so I guess that means the end times is coming soon. All right. Cool.
Well, so Bruce, I mean, I'm not dismissing your scholarly ways here, my beloved friend. Yeah. But Bruce, I mean, is your feeling that this is reality?
There is a group of conservative Christians that are very oriented toward the second coming, toward the rapture. They're consistently wrong in their dating. We're still talking, obviously. And so, there's an interesting story I have about two interesting stories about the rapture.
Mhm.
During 1970 or 71, I went up to Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and I was trying to find a concert by the Grateful Dead.
Did you have a
And
flower in your hair?
yeah, oh, you bet. If I'm going
Did
to
you have a blunt
Santa-
behind your ear as well?
Well, yes, all things are permissible. Not all things were lawful, but all were permissible. But I'm looking for this Grateful Dead concert.
Uh-huh.
And I stumble among to another concert, and it was a Christian concert, and the music was pretty good. And in between the two songs, and they were so loud I didn't hear the words, so I was kind of rocking out. They wanted to have rapture practice, so we'd raise up our hands and go Maranatha. Now I was just sitting there with a roach, with a blunt behind my ear, but that was my rapture, but rapture practice. And
Are you serious?
Wow.
At
I
a
am
Dead
serious.
concert?
Yeah, it was
What
not a
was
Grateful
actually
Dead
these
concert. It
people?
was the
It's
one
like Lonnie.
I went to the wrong concert.
Oh, God.
I went to-
I was like, what? Okay, got you. You wound up hanging out. Like, oh, wait a minute. Whoa, this is not what I thought this was.
And then fast forward 10 years to 1980,
Yeah.
79, 80. We were living in Tucson, Arizona. My wife and I were fairly newly married. There was our son was conceived in 79. He was going to be born in July of 1980. Up the street from us was a Christian commune, the Lighthouse. And they sold all their possessions because Jesus was coming soon, and they were going to go up into the Catalina Mountains above Tucson to be closer to Jesus when he comes again, and presumably to see Tucson burn. And I thought, there's two different kinds of preparation going on here. There's the preparation for a birth of a child, and there's a preparation to be a small group of people who will escape the death of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, there is a whole subculture. I finally yesterday blocked this group on Facebook, but there's a Revelation group on Facebook, and it just got to be too icky. But the thief in the night is coming, and it's going to be coming soon. It's going to be coming soon.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, this has been going on since since 1849 or 50 with the great
The Darby.
Yeah, Darby, and then the Seventh-day Adventists. The Seventh-day Adventists who went up to the hills of Massachusetts in white robes, and they were looking for Jesus to come again. They call it the Great Disappointment, that Jesus didn't come again. It does.
What, he didn't get the email that he was supposed to be somewhere at a certain time?
Nope, the Pony Express didn't arrive. Paul Revere was dead by then. But it's interesting because it becomes a way of saying our job as Christians is to get out of the world. Mm-hmm. Even though, as Kelly, you say, in the meantime, let's support policies that increase the incomes of wealthy people. Let us drill, baby, drill, so to speak. The earth is expendable, but on the way. There was a conversation between Hal Lindsey, the late great Planet Earth, and the fundamentalist scholar who you might remember, Kelly, Carl Henry. Remember Carl Henry?
I definitely know Hal Lindsey, but yeah.
Carl Henry was a fundamentalist scholar. He is a pretty smart guy in a lot of ways, but very, very, very traditional. And of course, Hal Lindsey kept redating the day of the second coming.
Right. I remember him for being that one that reset the date. Yeah.
Carl Henry said, "Well, why don't you give me your house and your car if you're sure about it?"
Mm-hmm.
He didn't give him the house and the car.
That is correct. He wouldn't go that far. It's like, oh, well, just in case.
But all these things are perhaps part of a spiritual spectrum, because the bad news is the good news. The bad news means Jesus is closer. There's always somebody who's the Antichrist, although there are people who think that that Donald Trump fits the Revelation definition of the Antichrist.
Yeah.
He kind of seems like that one who's
Yeah.
fooling the faithful.
Yeah.
The problem
Well,
with that is it turns us away from this world.
exactly.
I prefer a millisecond coming. I prefer a millisecond coming theologically, that God's always coming to us.
Mhm.
That each moment is a moment of decision. That each moment is a now of healing and wholeness, and the invitation to encounter the holy is moment by moment by moment by moment. We don't have to wait for Jesus to come.
Yeah,
Jesus is not somewhere out there. God isn't out there. That God's embedded in our lives and our histories, and that works for me. The challenge for progressives and liberal Christians, I think, is to proclaim boldly a vision of reality, a Christian vision, without being exclusive. That's the hard part, because built into the DNA of liberalism and progressivism is I'm never going to be fully right.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
God is bigger than any of our concepts of God, which puts us at a slight advantage with those people who are absolutely right. Even in the political realm. I support certain political policies, but I realize they aren't perfect.
Right.
Mhm.
And yet you talk with certain people on the right, that position they have is right, absolutely right. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, so Bruce, you get to something that you and I were talking about in the last episode was, and I threw it out there, this right or wrong, the binaryism, which is very annoying, but is so pervasive in our culture, right? And if we talk about a sick soul that we have of our country or of the globe, I think one of the things that makes us so sick is this thing called binaryism. Like things must fit in one of two, always right or wrong, good, bad, whatever. Is that? I'm asking you as a theologian. Is that even in the Bible anywhere?
Not, there are moments of excess, and there probably are things that we could say are ethically wrong. We could say that and have no doubt about it. I think child abuse is ethically wrong.
Yes, we agree.
I think that the rape of any sort thing is ethically wrong. I think what's going on in which you destroy communities for the in their entirety of civilians is ethically wrong.
Mhm.
Having said that, most things exist on a bit of a continuum.
That's my
most things. Let's go back to God. Let's go back to the Bible. As the old saying goes, back to the Bible, back to the Word of God. I think there was a hymn by that name back there. It was a radio show called Back to the Bible.
Mhm.
The Bible is not necessarily a binary book. Trinity Sunday is coming up, and Trinity Sunday is the greatest argument against the binary God. If you're threefold, you can't be binary.
That's so true. Like, hello, right here.
God is the ultimate non-binary being, if you believe in the Holy Trinity, and God is the ultimate they, if you want to talk about that. That God is encompassing male and female, and probably more than that, to be honest. I mean, certainly there are books now written, and you probably read about the queer God. That God doesn't fit into any of our categories, nor should God fit into any of our categories. I mean, on Trinity Sunday, one of the readings this year will be about Sophia, the creative companion of God. Proverbs 8. None of those binary things work because God isn't binary. God is the ultimate parent of the DEI. God's and the scripture to back it up. Hallelujah. The scripture to back it up is 1 Corinthians 12. There are many gifts. Already diversity is built into the Holy Spirit's work, right?
Mm-hmm.
A good community makes sure that everyone's gifts matters. That's inclusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a good community makes sure that everyone develops their gifts. I mean, this is way ahead of any program that's being done, that's being vilified right now. I mean, the body of Christ is by definition diverse, aiming at equality and inclusive of everyone. And if Christians took seriously the nature of the body of Christ as a non-binary, a pluralistic, everybody counts. In the political world, without going right or left on that, it means if somehow or other the world is God's being writ large, you can't leave anybody behind. If the world is God's being, reflection of God's being, then everyone has the right, because it's God's right, to become who they are intended to be, economically, spiritually, sexually. That's built into the nature of reality. And of course, we oftentimes choose to go against the nature of reality. And one of the tragedies of Christianity, at least in some forms of Christianity, is they believe they are acting on God's behalf, and yet at the same time, I think they're going against the aim of the universe, which is toward diversity and unity and inclusion and the wholeness of all creation. And that's not just Christian. That's not just Christian. You'll see it in Islam. You'll see it in Buddhism and Hinduism. You'll see the sense that, everyone eventually is part of this divine journey.
Correct.
That's kind of Paul's all in all, as he says.
All in all.
God will be all in all.
All in all. All right. So, you have to go to your point, because I was going to tie something back.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Finish your thought.
Well, so you were talking about our call as progressive Christians. Maybe this is in the same vein where you were going to go.
Might be.
So, proclaim boldly these very things. Why is it that this has not? It's a rhetorical question at some level, but why? Where were the progressive Christians? Like, what happened that we are so lopsided, and why this story is so lost? Because they're there. I mean, is this just kind of the progression of our faith? Is this a progression of humanity that and I asked you the question even about the pendulum swinging the way, is this the reclamation of our divinity? And we finally are getting the guts and the courage to speak up boldly about how we see liberal Christianity?
Well, and I think that's a worthy thing to say. And of course, again, one of the challenges of congregations, especially progressives and mainstream, a lot of them are made up of diverse people from diverse perspectives.
Yes.
And they're not always a similar club. I happen to go to a church that probably politically is 95% liberal or progressive. I can probably identify the 5 or 6 people who voted for Trump in the church. They wouldn't.
Are they the ones that have the Trump bumper stickers on the back of their car?
They wouldn't dare. They wouldn't dare. But we are a church of people who have bumper stickers that say,
bashed in.
"I bought my Tesla last year," so we're that kind of church.
Oh, right, exactly. Don't blame me. I bought the car before you went crazy.
Right. One question I have that kind of builds on what you were just saying is, from a theological standpoint, because it seems like there's often a theological wall when progressive Christians talk with conservative Christians. You say, because I see this online all the time, that people say, well, you're not being Christian because you're not feeding the poor. And it has no effect, because the person that they're talking to has a whole other theological system that's based on merit and personal responsibility, and the fact that if you give somebody something, it makes them it robs them of their ability to be responsible for their own well-being, blah, blah,
Oh,
blah.
yes,
But I
yes.
say all that to say, if we move forward and want to move forward hand in hand or in parallel
Yeah.
with conservative Christians, when it comes to theology, is there something theologically that we need to dislodge, like create some disruption on the conservative side and say, like, shake them up and be like, that, maybe let go of that? Or is there a way that we can kind of move forward and add on rather than subtracting?
Well, yeah, and I think we have to look at our own house too as we do that, as to where
Oh,
we
absolutely.
where
I got
we
some blind spots.
Yeah.
and I think that on the one hand we look for maybe something that could be common ground, and it could be the image of God, the Imago Dei, and not get too small detailed on it. It could be the reverence for life. I mean, there may be some ground for a new understanding of what it means to be pro-choice. That pro-choice has to involve more than just a woman's right to choose, but a society in which
Absolutely.
all types of parents are welcome. And not evaluated. The pro-life, in quotes, and I'm using these as political words, that life,
marketing terms.
that life continues after a baby is born.
Yes.
And
there's
that after a
collective
baby is
responsibility.
born, they need to be protected just as much as in the womb. And there are some communities where open-spirited pro-choice and pro-life people have gotten together. I'm not sure that those of us who are pro-choice really want more and more abortions. I think we want a society in which there are as few as possible, based on good education, economics, the valuation of women, and the decency of men. To put it in a certain area, that we may have a different understanding of the holiness of a fetus and the holiness of a baby than our more conservative friends do. But there's continuum there. And the continuum is we can't devalue. I'm a process theologian, so I believe that every cell in the universe has some value. Every cell in the universe has some value. Nevertheless, we have to make choices as what to do with those cells.
That is true. We do, but they doesn't diminish the value of those. But we do make choices. That so well said, Bruce.
So fetuses are still valuable.
Yeah.
Their value does not. Again, think about those of us who had children. We valued fetuses at some level, and a fetus value can't totally be dependent upon what I feel about it. No. And on the other hand, so we have to find ways to honor. I mean, the challenge for pro-choice people like myself is not to say fetuses are nothing. It's a little bit like the bumper sticker, "Save the baby whales." There is a certain sense, if you have reverence for life, and I'm pro-choice. I believe Roe v. Wade should be an option for our country. And yet we don't have to devaluate fetuses to get there. We have to talk about a society that welcomes mothers, that welcomes women who don't want to carry a fetus to term, that prevents unwelcome pregnancies from occurring to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd go so far as to say that birth control should be readily available to men. We haven't gone there, but that men who are not planning to have babies but be sexually active should give free vasectomies to them.
Wow. Okay, I'm processing that. I've never thought about it as such a simple, but you're right. If you're like, you know what, I don't want babies in this world, and I know that, then have a snip and move on.
It's interesting to weave into this. I saw a statistic that showed that since Roe v. Wade,
Yeah.
There was a surge of abortions
Yes,
in America,
yes.
and then it's steadily declined ever since, no matter
Yeah.
who was president or
Yeah.
who was in Congress. But the steeper declines happened during Democrat
Yeah.
administrations, and that was attributed to
Wow.
increased education, increased funding, increased access to birth control.
Of course.
So the idea of I'm going to make it absolutely illegal and try to restrict you from doing it.
Of course,
we kind of.
based
I mean, even the Bible talks about like the ineffectiveness of that.
Yes.
The law causes me to sin.
Yes.
Versus a more comprehensive approach.
We have a long way to go to become a great society and a beloved community.
Yes, yes.
There is work to be done there. Yes, there needs to be. So I want to go back to something you were saying, and I struggle with when Bishop Matt of the Episcopal Diocese of New York, who I really enjoy. I don't struggle with him. He's awesome. So I struggle though, because he will say one church. And I'm like, oh, like he's talking about the big church and
Yeah.
The body of Christ.
Yes, the body
church?
of Christ, the
Okay.
church, and all of that, right? And like he says it so openly and so authentically, like he believes that.
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Arr," and I growl when I hear that.
I understand that.
But as we're in this conversation and you're saying this, I'm like, yeah, okay, but it is true though, right? That we to put us off into different silos of our faith, and then you get into this game of gotcha where you're a Christian, no, you're not a Christian, everything else like this is just really kind of descending spiral. And so again, going back, is this some of the root of the soul sickness? And granted, I know we're more than just Christian culture here, but it is our predominant culture.
Yes.
And so with that kind of sickness in this like, well, yes, you are, or no, you're not. It can't.
Well, yes, I agree with you. I think that this has probably been baked into any religion that believes it knows God too well, and it's biblical too, of course. That people are called heretics, even in the New Testament, who may just have been well-intentioned believers that believe differently. I mean, I think we made a mistake by not figuring out how Peter responded to Paul's letter of Galatians.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Peter comes off as kind of the bad guy in Galatians. He's wishy-washy. He's the equivalent probably of somebody trying to keep the Democratic Party together. In all its many things. You've got to. It's much easier, even though he's has some grief right now, but it's much easier to be Mike Johnson than Hakeem Jeffries in many ways, because of the diversity of the party. How would have Peter justified his position, even though it was not the Pauline position? Mm-hmm. I'm trying to include people, but I'm working in a very gentle way to get there. And I think that when the bishop says one church, he's asking a lot of us. He's asking a lot of us, how do we see ourselves in any way related to some of our Christian siblings?
That's exactly what he's saying, and it's not up for debate with him. By the way, it's like this is established fact, and I can't disagree with him, although it makes me really growl. But
and I think he's speaking of a type of church that's ontologically, that means in its very essence, one, even when it isn't.
Yes, that's exactly what he is.
Yep. And certainly existentially and personally, I feel much more akin to many agnostics and atheists than I do Christians. And I've had to begin to look at my language, and I'm much more critical of Christians oftentimes than I am of non-Christians. But I have to look at my language and refer to those people as siblings in Christ, even though I have trouble believing it. And again, you look at family members. I come from a small family, but I know that some of the greatest knockout, drag-out fights have come in families situations. But you're still in the family.
Yeah, that doesn't
Still
change
the
you.
family.
That fact is a
Well,
fact. You're not going to question that fact.
Well, and I'm an example of that. Like my family, by and large, is very conservative Christians, and
Yes.
they, when they see me come in, they're like, "Oh, here comes,
Here comes Kelly,
rainbow sticker Subaru guy."
Yeah, that's right.
But
Extra granola, no extra charge.
That's right.
But we are family, and that love. I've often seen my family members, in the spirit of Christian charity, help people that the preacher might have told them not to help.
Well,
So
yeah.
there's these moments when their sense of love kind of even exceeds their theology.
Yes.
And there's this sense of like, there's genuine love and acceptance that happens on a ground level that doesn't happen
Right.
when you're talking theory. It's like, well, no, that person we should exclude. Or,
Yeah.
we welcome that. We love them, but we hate their sin.
Yeah.
But on a real level, if we're sitting having dinner, breaking bread together, those specific differences are not focused on. What's
Yeah, and
focused on
that's
is-
a question that's come up in our congregation by certain members asking the question, well, are there places we can meet collegially with other Christians? And that's again, it was easier. It's easier among the sort of mainstream or liberal Christians because we have the same basic viewpoints. The idea of being fully right is a problem, and that can happen to progressives too. In some,
Oh my God, absolutely. We can be really bad about being fully right
I
and
think
moralistic about it. Highly
Oh,
moralistic.
very much so. I've struggled because I'm probably more pro-Israel than some of my progressive colleagues. I'm also pro-Hamas, not pro-Hamas, but pro-Palestinian, especially the West Bank, since I know people on the West Bank, and I find that what's going on there, horrendous, just as horrendous, oddly enough, as Gaza, because it's more religiously motivated, the taking over of the Palestinian lands by very messianic Jewish people, not messianic Jews, but people who believe that the Messiah is coming will have to do with the unification of all that land. But if I found that if I have 2 or 3 questions about the most ardent pro-Palestinians, I get in trouble too. And my theory is if we agree with one another 70% of the time, we're doing quite well. And I can do business, maybe even with somebody I agree with 51% of the time and don't 49% of the time. And I think that's where, it brings back a question you had about my probably futile experiment of writing notes to Mike Johnson.
Yeah.
Right.
I always refer to the notes. They're little paragraphs that I send him about once a week on Facebook to say, my brother in Christ. That is per se, I'm not criticizing him in the slightest in these. I'm saying, as you think about this legislation, how might it be informed by Matthew 25? Where might the least of these be considered here?
Whoa, stop. Okay, maybe I missed something. Are you are sending these messages to Mark?
Little messages on Facebook, to him under his message. I found part of it. I do it because it helps me as well as him. I don't know if he ever sees them, but if they drop every week, some staffer sees them. Some staffer, and I always offer my time to. I'd love to read the Bible with you. I'd love to talk to you about the book of Amos sometime. And I don't do it in a confrontive way. I do it in a way of saying, well, Luke 4:18 to 19. How might that relate to certain legislation now? I've come, Spirit of the Lord is upon me to liberate the captives, to good news to the oppressed, and so forth. And I also do it for myself. I do it in the same way that on a good day I pray for Donald Trump. That not that he becomes like me, but that he feels that he is loved by God, that he can find the healing that is right and good for him. I write to Mike Johnson so I won't polarize.
Wow.
So I won't see him as an abstract figure. The God is omnipresent, except God's not present in those people's lives.
Which is so shitty to do that. Like, that's just bad theology, but yet but that's a common construct, right? Like, it's that either or, like you're either on the side or you're not, even though it's based on really flawed theology.
And so if you believe in the Imago Dei, or if you believe in the omnipresence of God, there, as the Quakers say, there has to be something of God in them.
Yes.
There's a song I sing occasionally in the Bible study. I do a weekly Bible study for our church, and it has mostly liberals, but a few conservative folks attended. A song I learned as a kid, it's a gospel song, spiritual. Not my brother, not my sister, but it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. And in some sense, not my brother, not my sister, but it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. I sing sometimes during my sermons, which is almost unheard of in progressive circles, but but maybe even in your podcast, I'll come back and sing a solo. The old
I would love it, absolutely.
But you think I'm standing in need of prayer too. I'm not seeing myself in quotes as a sinner as a definition of who I am. I do things that are less than optimal all the time. And so does he. And it's good occasionally to realize, as Orthodox progressive as I am, whatever that means, can you be an Orthodox progressive? Or as an attempt to be politically perspective.
Is that an oxymoron? Is that a contradiction in terms? Can you be an Orthodox progressive?
As long as you're orthodox in your view that you might change your opinion, you're but saying that I too need the grace of God, and so does Donald Trump, and so does Paula White, and so does Kristi Noem. I mean, I can caricature those people all day long because they are kind of humorous at times.
Okay, so let's go. I'm going to challenge you to something, though. Everything you say is the core reason why somebody looking at our faith through that lens there, it requires humility. It requires love, right? Some level of empathy and compassion. Why is that so lacking with on all of us? I'm just as guilty. Like, I don't want to love them.
No, I understand that. I have some choice words occasionally, and I'm holding them back because they'll be eternally remembered on this podcast.
Exactly. Yes.
The vast listening audience will tell my deceased mother what I just said. But there is a sense in which we cannot stand to be partly right. There probably is the case that Reinhold Niebuhr was correct to some degree when he said that, I have to look at the falsehood in my own truth and the truth in my neighbor's falsehood. There are limits. Twice a day, Mike Johnson may be right about something, but those two times a day, I have to give consideration to. I think maybe the clock has stopped more for some politicians than others, but they may already have been clocked out. But having said that, I can still be bold. I take this from Howard Thurman, his book on mysticism and social change. The mystic has to turn on the gas. The mystic has to turn on the water starting to boil here. And it sometimes has to make it difficult for the oppressor. Your boycotts, protests, getting arrested in the Capitol, so on and so forth. But
Oh, you're talking about like
and
what?
gum up the works.
Yeah, with Reverend Barber a couple of weeks
good
ago.
old, well, he walks the talk, doesn't he? You have to do
I'll
that.
tell you what, that man, he walks the walk.
Yeah. And what's interesting is he has a book that he wrote about white poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. He's not one trick pony.
No, he's definitely not. Just because his skin color is what it is, he's not just about his color.
Yeah, there are more white people numerically than there are black people in this country who are poor.
Oh my God, absolutely. Mm-hmm. No, I grew up in Missouri. That was a very common, and also, I'm listening to the Book of Joy that is Douglas Abrams' conversation, he did with the Dalai Lama and with Desmond Tutu.
Yes.
And just in one of the chapters I was listening to yesterday was about loneliness. And in particular, he talks about the human condition. This is the Dalai Lama in this case, that we as humans, we are envious of those things that are above us. We'll be competitive with those folks that we believe to be equal to us. And then we will hold contempt for those people who we see below us.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And this goes to the white trash thing. And I lived in that culture where, I would never use that phrase because that's a horrible thing to say to someone.
And white trash.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's reprehensible. Like,
yeah,
that's like the N word and then some, not for comparison's sake, but like
it kind of insults everybody.
Oh my God. it's horrible at so many levels, but yet that's exactly what you're talking about, Bruce, right there. It's like, and like, but that's a reality. But we get really uncomfortable. We don't like to talk about that stuff.
And I think that Barber, again, if you were going to look at the story of two rotundas, Barber knew exactly what he was doing. I actually was prepared to be arrested years ago in the rotunda, and I was with a Sojourners group, with Jim Wallace's group, and we learned we were going to pray in the rotunda. They kept talking about praying in the rotunda so long that they went so late that I had to go pick up a child like you, Gary. Yeah. So I didn't get arrested, but there was a sense in which Barber knew he'd be arrested. But,
absolutely. Yeah.
But he arrested for praying for justice. But 3 months ago, again, to use the example, the president of the United States talked about being delivered by God to make America great again. 2 different rotunda pictures. He did his inaugural speech in the rotunda because it was so cold. It's a little bit like I think what John Dominic Crossan and Marcus Borg say about the 2 parades on Palm Sunday. Jesus coming in from one side, and Pilate coming on the other side with war horses.
So John Thetamanil preached on that very thing on Monday, Thursday at St. Mark's in the Bowery, and that's the first time I've heard that.
Reading off the same script.
I was just I said to John afterward, I was gobsmacked. I didn't know that story about to look at it from that lens of that was an act of rebellion by Jesus. I mean, there were two simultaneous things. There was, of course, we know of him walking, coming in on the donkey, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like, the admiration and, what's going to happen to him, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, actually, there's much more to it. Like, there's a deeper meaning to this. This was like a rebellious act against empire.
Right. And some of the Gospels tie that with, then he's
scourging in the temple.
Flipping over the tables.
Yeah, flipping the tables, baby, which is one of my favorite stories.
And to some degree, even if Jesus wasn't as conscious as John and I may think he was of that act as being an act of resistance, the very fact that he did it was an act of resistance.
You don't even have to suggest that Jesus, that's true. And maybe I applied that in there.
No,
it doesn't matter. But the very fact that it was done was an act of resistance, which is the most powerful element of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like the story of again, I've spent a lot of time with Francis of Assisi, and And his very being was as a simple person without a home preaching the gospel was an indictment of a church that owned most of the property in Italy at the time.
Right,
People on the Crusades. His very being, and again, maybe that goes back to us trying to figure out how to walk the talk of progressive theology without making a fuss about it. How do our lifestyles contrast from the world around us? How do we live more simply? How do we have a home? I mean, one of my mentors, Gordon Forbes, he was pastor of Westmoreland UCC in Bethesda when I went to Washington, D.C. to be chaplain at Georgetown in 1982. He was pastor there. That's a church I still attend now. After 20 years away, we've moved back. He tells the story of a ministry-changing experience he had when he was the chairman of the Democratic Party in Minnesota, as well as being a pastor of the church. And somebody asked him one Sunday, "Do I have to be a Democrat to be part of your church?" And I think it changed his ministry. He entered into spiritual direction. Thereafter, he started questioning the fact, was he excluding people by being too strident in some areas? Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be strident, by the way. Howard Thurman talks about the mystic reformer performing a shock treatment on the oppressor. Yes. That the oppressor has to feel the pain in some level that the oppressed does, and the common humanity, but you never quit seeing that the fact that the oppressor is still human. And this, again, the oppressor is hurt by their oppression. Our injustice hurts us. And I think in trying to share lovingly and finding some place of common cause with the people we disagree with, I mean, I'm struggling to want Trump to succeed at anything, knowing it might make him more popular. But at some level, if I'm truly a patriotic American, I do want him to succeed at the things that are right for him to succeed to. It seems unlikely he'll broker a peace deal in Ukraine or in Gaza. It seems unlikely that he'll have a peace deal with Iran. But if he does, more power to him.
Wow. That's, I mean, it's true. I mean, he is kind of driving the bus in a way. So as passengers on the bus, we don't want him to wreck it, even if it allows us a little bit of schadenfreude afterwards to be like, we told you he was going to wreck the bus. That, we don't necessarily want him to fail.
It's a very
interesting country.
We become apocalyptic too, in which the bad news is the good news. So when I go to Trader Joe's and buy Trader Joe's coffee is the best cheap coffee around. It was $4.99 3 weeks ago. It's $6.49 now. And I know that, or I go to the Giant store across the way to buy eggs this morning, and there are hardly any eggs. This is Potomac, Maryland. Right. Average income here is $150,000 to $200,000 a year. This is a wealthy neighborhood. Not many eggs, and the eggs you can get are $9 a dozen. And there's only one reason for that. It's the current administration, as far as I can tell. Part of me says, boy, let people be dissatisfied. And I think to myself, but some people can't afford anything near $9 for eggs.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I love, and your analogy you just used about the bus, it is so easy to forget that we're all on the bus together. And when you said that, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I am a passenger on this bus. I'm not an observer. I'm not standing on the side of the road. Well, I might like to think that I am, but I'm not.
And the three of us have safety belts. There are some people on the bus who have no safety belt whatsoever. They don't have an income. They don't have
No, they're clinging on to the top of the bus, man.
Yeah.
Wherever they might be.
Yeah. It's, we often talk, we end up talking about Trump a lot, around the dinner table. And we've had to have conversations with our kid. And this was really a few years ago when she was a little bit younger, because there was living where we were living at the time, in New York City, going to a private school there.
Yeah.
Everybody was progressive.
Yeah.
There was always this apocalyptic talk of like, oh my gosh, Trump is here. He's going to destroy everything. Being a little kid at that time, she was terrified. Like, I heard this all the time. We had to stop and go like, wait a minute. Like, Trump is a human, a person. Like, we know where he lives. Like, we can actually go, like, take the subway over and see Trump Tower. Like, that's his house. Yeah. He's somebody's dad. He's somebody's granddad. Like, he's somebody's husband. Like, he's a child of God.
Yeah.
And has limits. Like, he's not like this limitless. It's not like one of those Marvel movies where, Thanos has
yes, it's Thanos, exactly.
It's destroy
just unstoppable.
Half the planet. That, this is also a human being. But it's those two, like, opposing, as a progressive, we want to be like nonviolent and better than you. Yeah. But also we're called to disrupt.
Yeah. And I think to hold those in tension is important. And to hold our own sense of being better than, as long as we're better than, we're more moral than, it's a good thing. And I think for us, we could talk about this another time, but there's going to be a lot of recovery, even in the best possible outcomes of American politics. There's going to be a lot of recovery. The patient is indeed, is serious condition. The patient is intensive care.
I'm laughing not because of what you're saying, but Bruce, you're circling back to where we started in the previous episode about a very sick patient, our culture that we are in right now.
And we have to have patience, and that's again where maybe as progressive Christians, it's been suggested that one act of resistance is simply to not let them take the joy away from us, to not let them take the gratitude away from us, to not be dominated. Again, I think of the civil rights movement. Of when Fannie Lou Hamer starts singing "This Little Light of Mine," people are all of a sudden uplifted. Jim Crow is down there now. Jim Crow doesn't. There's a bigger world here. There's a bigger world going on, and I think that we can easily succumb to doom scrolling. We can easily, but we also, as long as we can sing a song, as long as we can notice beauty. And let this, what is it, Dostoevsky, and the salvation of the world is in beauty, and bring beauty to the world and sing songs. That won't solve all our problems, but it will keep us from being the victims of other people's actions. I'll just say it to bring it home because I know it's near time, and as a Baptist preacher, raised a Baptist, I'm starting to get warmed up now. But
I got to get my roast out of the oven. Yeah. Sorry.
But Eddie Hillesum, I don't know if you know Eddie Hillesum, the mystic who died in a concentration camp. She is a young woman, Jewish Christian woman. Eddie Hillesum, look for the Interrupted Life. She's become somebody a lot of mystics look to. She looked for beauty even in the concentration camp.
Yes. I've heard about that, and thank you for bringing that to our attention and our listeners. Absolutely, yes.
She's a witness to us because this house is on fire.
Yeah,
and she's aware that she's on a bus that maybe she has no control of.
Right.
But the bus driver is not the only reality.
That is correct.
The bus driver is going to be dead in 10 years, probably. I keep telling the people in my church, nobody thinks much about Herod anymore, but they think of Mary of Magdala. Powerless woman lives on. Who remembers Herod? Who remembers Pilate? But they remember Peter. They remember Paul. They remember Phoebe. We still talk about those people. No one thinks about Pilate. So we have to think that the moral and spiritual arcs of history will go on long after our own little mini apocalypse.
Right. Wow. It's so hard not to think in absolutes, because I find myself going from like, oh, God is in control, so it's okay. Except God isn't always in control. So,
Yeah, right.
Because there's that whole, is God completely powerful thing?
Yeah,
But then
yeah.
somehow love wins in the end, and it's that.
Don't let them take your light away from you.
That's right.
Yeah, but the fact that even that a nuance exists is very different than the, absolutist. I think it's reconciling those tensions is an important part of the communication.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, we have brought this episode to an end.
We've had some radical love today.
We have had some radical love.
And we've been alive.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing all your insights. We just love talking with you, and getting all the ideas and the quotes and the book ideas, and
it's amazing what a Baptist preacher can do.
That's right.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
If I still had a lighter.
Yeah.
That's right.
This
is the state of my light. It's a candle without a light on it. So,
Bruce, thank you again. What a wonderful episode, and I hope our listeners get as much joy from this conversation as I do.
It is a joy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Recorded at the Bravery Studios in Garfield, New Jersey. All rights reserved. Find our episodes on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And check us out at radicallovelive.com, along with our personal websites at markdilcom.com and kellywilson.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.